Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting day at Health Impact. Today, we'll be discussing what every CIO must know about moving to the cloud and to prevent and battle cyber attacks. While hybrid cloud solutions is certainly by no means considered a new concept to any of you, more recently, there's been a huge motivator to adopt a hybrid cloud solution in an effort to mitigate risk associated with the ransomware threats we're all well aware of. And while many organizations start out with one cloud, having the option for multi-cloud increases flexibility and resilience. So, it is healthcare. We are naturally more risk adverse, and the importance of impact to lives of patients we care for is near and dear to us. And as well as the resource scarcity is often naturally held back health systems from being early adoptions of cloud and multi-cloud. But slow adoption is beginning to exacerbate vulnerabilities. So, while mounting ransomware attacks highlight the need for more organizations to move swiftly, the need for resilience and security was never stronger than as recently in 2020. And the response proved that hospitals can actually move fast when necessary. Today's discussion is actually very near and dear to me personally. I previously served as a hospital CIO and a healthcare IT leader for many years at several organizations in New York City. And I am now part of Sirius as a director of healthcare, working with many CIOs across the country. Just to know, within Sirius, we understand and appreciate how vital cybersecurity is for all industries, highlighted recently within healthcare, which is why the security focus within our organization makes up over $1 billion annually, or about a quarter of our total overall revenue. I have no doubt that cloud adoption and cybersecurity protection is hot on everyone's mind, and I just can't wait to begin today's session. I'm honored to facilitate today's discussion, to be joined by two seasoned leaders in the industry, Nasser Nizami of Jefferson Health and Steve Dunkel with Geisinger. As a reminder, please remember to use the chat feature and to ask any questions you may have. Hopefully we'll be able to respond during the session, but if not, be sure that we'll answer via email. Let's jump right in. Nasser, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, your organization, etc.?
Sure. So my name is Nasser Nizami. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer for Jefferson Health and Thomas Jefferson University. We are a 14 hospital and a 2-campus university serving greater Philadelphia region. Prior to joining Jefferson, I was with New York Presbyterian, and before that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at Alien Health. And really awesome. Happy to be here today.
Thank you, Nasser. Steve?
I'm Steve Dunkel. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Geisinger. We're located in central Pennsylvania. Our location is very rural. We're one of the largest rural healthcare systems in the United States. We essentially 12 hospitals. We have a research wing. We are integrated. We have the health plan, and we have School of Medicine. So feel very fortunate to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you both. Having familiarity with both your organizations and the incredible work you've done, I'm excited myself to hear and learn more. So let's just jump right in. Can each of you describe the cloud journey at your organizations so far? Nasser, if you don't mind sharing first.
Absolutely, I would love to. So look, and you choose the right word of journey, because it's truly a journey that we are on for the cloud. At Jefferson, we started, organically many years ago, and for some time, I think we did not really consciously even think about that we are moving towards cloud. I want to say probably 3 years ago, we started discussions and saying, oh yeah, we should be thinking about cloud anytime a new application came in. But we really became serious, I think, during COVID, because the benefits of being on cloud were pretty evident to us. All the applications that were cloud-based, we really scaled. Jefferson is not a work-from-home environment. When COVID hit us last year in March, we had to move several thousand of our users to work from home. And every single service that was cloud-based just worked, and it worked seamlessly for us, whether it was Office, whether it was Zoom, whether it was telehealth services. At the same time, and I think we're going to talk more about it, is we also came to the realization that many of the cloud vendors, especially the larger ones, the Microsoft, Amazon, and some of other key vendors, have really mature cybersecurity program. And at the time, if you recall the timeline, we were as a nation dealing with a lot of ransomware, and we still are. So for a variety of reasons, scalability being one of them, efficiency being one of them, cybersecurity being one of them, we about 12 months ago or so, we decided that we are just going to accelerate our program. And at this point, everything that is new, including ERP or EMR, everything is in play. And our goal really is in the next 3 to 5 years, turn the metric to become really 80% or more in the cloud.
Excellent. Thank you, Nasser. That's it's an incredible journey, and I'm glad you honed in on that word. You know, I don't think there'll ever be an end, right? I think it's just going to keep evolving. Steve, how about yourself? I'm curious to know about your perspective and the journey at Geisinger thus far.
Yeah, and again, not to be repetitive, but it is indeed a journey, and that's my opinion. That's definitely how organizations need to look at it. Probably like many organizations, the start of our journey was cloud-based solutions relative to software as a service. And we have been moving in that direction for quite some time. I think from a security standpoint, that's a good spot to be in. Where I start worrying the most and wanting to make certain we get it right is when you begin to work into the infrastructure as a service model. And there's generally, in some cases, an assumption that a lot of the security capabilities of the cloud come with that, which is, I would caution, not the case. With infrastructure as a service, it's still very much your security team needs to have knowledge of cloud capabilities and be able to extend the, I would call it the NIST security framework model into the cloud. We place a heavy reliance on the NIST 853 documentation. That's sort of our Bible in that regard. And we map very closely, and obviously FedRAMP, if you're familiar with that, plays into this. But we, as part of the journey, we're mapping very close to the NIST 853, making sure those control sets are ported over to the cloud just as they are with our on-prem. We anticipate that we will be a hybrid cloud model for quite some time. I would say at least for the next 3 years. And that brings complexities, as we know, also from a security standpoint, because what you have already doesn't really go away when you start. You still have to keep that up and maintain it. And in today's world, to Nassar's point, by maintain it means continuous improvement because the threats are always changing. So with a hybrid model, as we expect we're going to be with at least for 2 to 3 years, I would advise that your security team is now taking on an additional load of participating in the effort to move into infrastructure as a service, which there's, with most security teams, that's a bit of a skills gap, but it's secondly a fairly significant workload. And so we've relied on consulting firms, bringing them in to help us. And it also works well because our existing security team gets to work with those consultants and begin to understand, the cloud aspect of it. I think with cloud, we all know that standardization is one of the targets we're after, and scalability. The only thing that we're seeing in our journey is initially we wanted to stay with one cloud provider. And we're seeing already that multiple cloud environments probably in our future. And why that's important from a security perspective is now, especially with infrastructure as a service, you're not only supporting cloud in one environment, but possibly 2 or 3 other ones. So the workload goes up. And it also takes into question how much of the cloud providers' security tools you want to look to versus having a solution that scales across all cloud providers. Amazon has a good security tool set. Microsoft has a good security tool set. But just as an example, if you're in both of those cloud spaces, do you really want your team looking at multiple panes of glass to support that? So again, part of the journey.
Amazing, great feedback, some commonalities and some individual perspectives. Thank you for that. We definitely want to talk about cyber, obviously, and cyber breaches and balancing that. I do have one quick follow-up question. It's always piqued my interest. Now, again, it was interesting at the different organizations where I was previously CIO. Cultures are very different, and now being able to talk to hundreds of CIOs across the country, I'm always interested in specific perspectives about one question. What is it in the past couple of years as your journey has taken on? Has it been easier for the organization? And by that, I mean outside of IT, your leadership team, has it been easier for them? I use the easier as opposed to more challenging. Has it been easier for them to adopt this concept of moving the crown jewels or the vital systems outside of the brick and mortar? Has it been easier for them to accept that and adopt to that? Or has it been easier for the IT team, who many times naturally have this sense of security and safety and protection when it's inside? I'm curious to hear each of your perspective. Where has it been less challenging maybe in moving to the cloud, from the overall culture and support by the business or from the internal IT staff?
I will start, and I said that's a very interesting question, because I'll say that the broader organization, the leadership, the board, it was more of an education from my perspective, but it was not challenging once they understood the benefit of cloud, and especially I think there are data points where they can relate themselves. Everyone is using some sort of a web-based email, web-based storage, telebanking, etc. So very few people, pictures, social media, and you connect their personal lives to what we are doing. I think it becomes very easy to grasp the idea of what the benefits of the cloud in terms of efficiency and scale, etc. Cybersecurity was, I think, an education area, because general feeling, and I think it was true a few years ago, that not all cloud providers are equal. And I think to Steve's point, it really also depends on the model that you adopt, whether it's IaaS, whether it's PaaS, whether it's SaaS, the maturity of the provider itself, whether it's a native vendor of the application or you're just going with Azure or Amazon, etc. I would say that it was more, I think, it took more convincing, I would say, of the IT team to shift the perspective that to give up the control. I think that the core of the issue was IT teams, and this is not at Jefferson. I think I'm speaking for other organizations that I've worked at, and also talking with my peers, that the core of move to the cloud from an IT perspective, or the control that you give up, because you have to give up the control. You're not now managing boxes. You're not managing, if you're a SaaS environment, even things like patching, for instance, certainly OS level patching, right? So you also don't have or limited, I think, control on the application updates, the feature functionality piece of things, right? Again, depending on what model it is, I'm talking about SaaS now. So overall, I would say that it took a very healthy dialogue, I would say, and it was truly a healthy dialogue, where I think, at least at Jefferson, where we don't have to convince anyone that cloud is the right thing to do. Look, I mean, and I think Steve used this word hybrid. We are always going to be in hybrid for quite some time. So certain things like in research, we are a high compute environment, very intensive. Those things are just not available in cloud-based. Imaging is still, I think, works locally the best, right? And there are other areas which I think are examples of things that are going to be local. So earlier, when I said 80-20, that's what we think in an ideal situation for us for quite some time is going to be that hybrid model, where we are going to be mostly in the cloud, but there are still going to be some critical systems that are going to be running local. But our team's perspective have changed. And second change that I think which has to go with the move to cloud is the retraining and the capabilities assessment of the team, because the folks, the point of view, the way people manage, the teams manage is not different. With a vendor, our partnerships being a lot more stronger, or a need for our partnerships to be a lot more stronger. The focus on controls, the focus on audit, instead of direct, patching. We are not able to scan a server that is hosted by a third party, if we think, hey, there's something wrong there. So it's a different kind of mindset. It's a different kind of security controls. It's a different kind of risk-based controls that we have to just train. But overall, I would say we are at a very good spot where everybody, I think, believes in the value of a hybrid model that is mostly cloud-based.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it definitely resonates well with me. Steve, how about at Geisinger? Similar, different?
Similar. We started, as I mentioned earlier, with software as a service. I suspect all healthcare organizations are using the same approach. And I think the big shift that has been a challenge for us, and again, as it was pointed out earlier, communication is key. But as we move into infrastructure as a service, we often use the term cost to enable. And it's that part that from a senior leadership perspective, I think came as a surprise, that actually to get there, costs initially have to go up. And obviously as leaders, we're all thinking, well, if we move to the cloud, there's all these opportunities and advantages. But now we're finding that it's going to take us some spend to get there. And that includes security, which goes up probably at a higher level in comparison to other aspects in IT. And again, it comes back to that maintaining multiple environments and having to deal, the threats are very similar. The mode of attack sometimes can change. And certainly the technologies, you may go with the same vendor, but the technologies have to be different in the cloud. For example, container security. So that was a challenge for us, is we looked more at the long term and said, wow, there's savings there. What we didn't really appreciate is the cost to enable. And that to us came as a surprise. And again, it comes back to infrastructure as a service is very different than software as a service.
I would just say that I absolutely agree with you, Steve. I think it's a mistaken belief that moving to cloud somehow reduce cost. There is a cost to move to cloud, and even in a steady state, I think someone has to maintain all the services, and we have not seen any cost saving. The reason to move to cloud are very compelling, and I think I'm a proponent of moving to the cloud, but cost saving is not one of them.
Yeah, at least in the short run, that's for sure. I think too, one of our areas that we've tried very hard to focus on standardization, and I mentioned this before, staying with a single cloud provider. And what we're seeing, and from my past experience, it certainly reflects that. That's a good intent coming right out of the gate. And some organizations may be able to stick with that, which is definitely, in my mind, standardized and it's lower cost. But there's a lot of pressures an organization's going to have to think about that's coming down the road, or maybe there today, that is going to force a decision. Are we going to have to go multi-cloud? And I think one of those that may be coming is the regulatory aspect, where the whole idea of resilience, and do you want to have all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, by having a single cloud provider. The other aspect is the whole upload, download, data transfer. If you're doing that between multiple clouds, there's some cost could be associated with that. And the organization begins to think, well, if we move this portion of our services to cloud X, we can reduce cost in that regard. So that also we're seeing is going to force more of a multi-cloud approach, which does have significant security implications if it's not designed right.
Yeah, it sounds like in many ways this reminds me of the most common best of breed versus best of suite, right? Pendulum. It's kind of like as this matures, you kind of try to find the balance between best of suite, best of breed, best of suite until you, right, as it evolves. Excellent. Thank you both for sharing that. Just jumping more deeper into cybersecurity and cloud. When whether it's vendors or colleagues, when they tell me, I have the perfect solution for you, it sets up every red flag, right? There is no perfection. And so I always try to look for the balance. When we talk about specifically to cybersecurity, as both in your leading roles, can you speak to some of the advantages as well as the disadvantages as it relates to security in folks' journey to cloud, multi-cloud, single cloud? So like, what are some of this is your saving grace by moving to the cloud, and these are the things you really have to pay attention to when you move to the cloud, specific to cybersecurity. Nasser, if you want to go first.
Sure, happy to start. So, look, I think there is over time, I think the more mature organizations are, I think, differentiating themselves from other organizations. So we had some of our assets hosted by smaller vendors, and we learned that their security practices were not, I think, standards-based. Certainly, we follow 853 as well, like a Steve organization do, and there were nowhere any standards being followed. So I think, first of all, there is a difference between who the hosting provider is, right? I do believe, though, that the larger, more mature providers like Microsoft, like Amazon, have differentiated themselves from a DR, business continuity point of view, from a cybersecurity point of view. They are providing services that are fairly decent, I would say. Certainly from a commercial perspective, I feel that the services that they provide are at par with what we could do, and it's sometimes actually even better than what we could do, even using our resources. Because cyber, one of the major issues in cyber is there are just not enough resources. There are just not enough qualified resources. Even if we had all the money to hire people, there are just not people that we can hire, right? And organizations, again, like larger organizations, have the resources, and they have demonstrated that they do a much better job of security. So at one level, I think that I feel very good going into arrangements with these larger organizations. I'm really concerned when I see organizations that offer hosted services, cloud-based services that are not mature, right? So that's one aspect. Secondly, I would say one of the disadvantages that we see is the lose of, again, control, especially when an incident happens, right? And that's where the term partnerships become very important. The legal contracts become very, very, very important because everything is driven at that point by what you agreed to in the first place. Or did you agree to real-time monitoring? Are you getting all the alerts? Is the organization obliged to let you know of an incident the minute it happens? Who is going to run an incident when it happens? And these are some of the things that are certainly, we have gone through and experienced and have been learning for us. And I would say it's more of a learning curve. Right now, it seems like a disadvantage, I think, and it is in the shorter run because our organizations are simply not set up to that model. We were set up in a model where we own the asset, we run the asset, we ran the incident, we have access to everything. That model with the cloud is not shifting. To coming to multi-cloud, look, even though our goal is to be an Azure, we completely recognize that it's going to be a very, very hybrid approach when it comes to cloud providers. Our preference is SaaS, if a provider can provide, whether it's an ERP provider, whether it's any other, if it's a mature provider and they offer SaaS, our preference would be that. Even on the infrastructure as a service, our goal, and I'm a big believer in standardization. If we can have a provider fulfill all our need, that would be our preference, but we recognize that is simply not going to be possible, because in healthcare, especially provider healthcare, we often work with many joint ventures, partnerships, where we are not the only decision makers, and therefore we have a need to be flexible. We don't want to be in a situation where we are turning down partnership because someone have not their assets on a platform that we use, right? So for that reason, and certainly, there is something to be said about, especially if you think about ransomware. Where do you want all your assets? Do you want all your assets in one basket? I mean, that's a question. I don't know what the right answer to that question is, but for us, we do think that the organic nature of cloud and the way it's being distributed, because there are some vendors who have really mature software as a service solution. There are other vendors who are offering infrastructure as a service, and we want to move us there. Organically, we are in this distributed environment. There are some pros and cons to that, and one of the con is the added management layer, but I think one of the pros is that, yeah, your security-wise, you're distributed. If you have an incident with one of your application is down, you don't have to worry about rest of your applications being down. I mean, again, this is, I think, there are strong arguments on both sides, but at least that's our point of view. So in summary, I would say that there are pros and cons of being the cloud, but in our, I believe that if with mature, large, resource-rich vendors, there are more pros to moving to a cloud-based offering than cons.
Thanks, Nasser. Steve, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And I think the security profession, 5 years ago, was more cautious about the cloud environment and, challenging that, well, that can't be secure because we can't actually put our hands on it. It's off at a distance. So therefore, it can't be trusted. I think that's part of a security person's nature. But hopefully we've crossed that bridge, and I see many of my peers embracing the cloud, which my opinion is that's where we need to be. One of the moves we made at Geisinger is, and it wasn't totally intentional, but several years ago, myself and my department made the decision we were going to go cloud first. And so fortunately, the majority of our security solutions today run in the cloud. And my department does have our own cloud instance that we run some of our tools in. And that's turned out to be very beneficial for us because we're already ahead of the game in that regard. And many of our security solutions providers run in the cloud, same cloud provider that we have targeted to use as our primary. So that's positioned us very well. And my advice is the more of your security solution you can get in the cloud now, my opinion, the better. There again, when you think in terms of where we're going, there are some definite security challenges, and there has to be a shift in the way of thinking, because start thinking of integration and how the information and the connection of services to support that is occurring. And it's obviously not just the cloud provider, it's what we've dealt with in the past. You have to think of the network layer. You have to think of the parties in between that are enabling that exchange of information and services. The use of APIs, that's a shift. But the same needs are there. Threat detection, as Nassar mentioned, incident response, the ability to investigate incidents. Much of that burden still resides on your security department. But the new opportunity is, a very good point, is it has to take partnership. And one of the things we're working very hard to do is build that partnership up with our cloud-based, not only infrastructure as a service, but software as a service build up the partnership. So if we ever need to, in the middle of the night, get on a war room call or conference call with several providers, those relationships are already built. That's critical.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. Switching for a bit to a related question. So everybody's aware of the recent cyber breaches. I actually learned through my current role that there's actually, I'm assuming you both know this, there's safe harbor by other countries for people, bad actors who do this. There was a breach of a cyber insurance company. So now kind of the bad actors have a targeted list, right? They actually are now able to target those that have significant insurance policies, right? You're not going to go after someone who has very little recovery dollars. As sad and as scary as it might be, there's many organizations. Sadly, I shouldn't say many, but there's several organizations that have really been brought to their knees. It's probably no secret at this point that our team at Sirius has been called, day zero to come and help recover from those across the country. My two specific questions related to that, and I have my own perspective now working with many organizations. Number one is, do you have access at your organizations to learn from the specific Achilles heels or those weakest links that have occurred now across the country, right? Whether it's the Active Directory breaches, right, or other things. Do you have forums, obviously HealthIMPACT being one great one, where you're able to actually learn specifically about, how do we stay one step ahead of our friend running away from the beer, maybe, right? So that's number one. And question number two is related. So as I'm sure you both do your tabletops for your incident response to cyber breaches, moving to the cloud, you're kind of giving away a part of the team that has to participate in those tabletops, right? It's now scenarios that can happen outside of your control. Question number one is, do you learn from others? Are you able to take that, and is it a quick enough pace where you can actually learn quickly, protect yourself quickly? And question number two is, how do you handle your tabletops now that for cybersecurity specifically, now that part of that is not within your own direct controls? Either one of you go first. I don't know if Steve wants a moment to
Go ahead,
catch his breath.
Steve.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Threat intel is critical in today's cyber business. To your point, Eli, the idea of just running with the pack isn't working. You have to aggressively pursue threat intel and information gathering and getting actively engaged in different security communities within healthcare. And it's a very close-knit group, very much information exchange, but HISAC, getting involved in some of the initiatives with HSCC, the Joint Cyber Group, participating in policy development, build your network, have individuals you can reach out to in other healthcare organizations and ask questions. How are you dealing with this? Have you seen this? Establishing solid relationship with your FBI cohorts. That's all critical. You've got to stay ahead of the game in today's world, because if you're waiting for things to happen, they will. It's better to be getting those indicators of compromise in both the on-prem and the cloud environment, getting those in your system as early as you can so that when it hits critical mass, you're already there.
Thanks, Steve.
So absolutely agree with you, Steve, that building networks, relationship with governmental organizations is critical. If you think about one thing I would say is that if you think about how a cyber incident runs, right? So often the organization that is compromised learns about an incident weeks, days, months after that something bad happened. And once organizations learn that, typically the first they are trying to figure it out, and that takes several weeks. By the time the news become public, it could be days, months, very, very old information. And unfortunately, the nature of cyber incidents is such that often we don't get the details. The only way to get the details is really if organizations is forced due to regulatory reasons, and that, I think, in my opinion, is very limited and very late. Or you have some personal context, and and even then, because of legal reasons, etc., folks are very limited in what they want to share. They are candid. We all have our own private networks where we can pick up the phone and call them. But there is the information, I think, is slow. And high-level information sometimes comes fast. Hey, something ransomware happened at that institution, but then there are no details in under that to say, look, what happened? How can we protect ourselves? So often we are scrambling and going back to the basics, I think, which is the right thing to do. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'd say that there's room for the information flow to be optimized and improved. And I would say something that this is, I think, a little controversial, because I think that really government needs to take a lead on this, because I absolutely believe that there is no commercial organization that is 100% secure. There's just no such thing, right? And the nature of attacks, and you give a perfect example, they're so sophisticated now that people are going after organizations that they know have cyber insurance, right? And this kind of sophistication, healthcare systems, universities, even commercial organizations with deep pockets are simply not well equipped, and we are seeing this in our daily news. Okay, for things that actually come on the news and things that simply never show up, we never learn about, right? So I think that this is an area where there is a pretty significant gap, and there's room, but I am not sure if individual organizations, private organizations, can fill in the gap. I just, again, my 1%'s thought there.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, again, having been in healthcare for so long. It's, there's a sense that we sink or swim together, right? Unlike other industries, we're totally there's not that sense of competition when it comes to protection. We learn, and we obviously continue to need to do that. Have your tabletop exercises or scenarios, have they changed when you've introduced the cloud? In other words, have you extended it to scenarios that you haven't in the past now because things are not directly within your control? Have your partners, your cloud partners, have they helped you with that? Have they participated in tabletop exercises or scenarios? Just curious to know about, again, in talking about balancing going to the cloud, cybersecurity, preparedness, response, has that changed your thought around preparedness and tabletops?
Well, from a Geisinger perspective, certainly it has changed, especially with software as a service, because like most organizations, we have many of those partners. And oftentimes we're involved in their incidents because we rely on them. They have our information, and sometimes we're integrated with them. So there's always in both actual incidents, but in our incident tabletops, we include vendors, and we'll select certain few individual or vendors that we reach out to and say, hey, we're going to do a tabletop. Are you game to be part of this? Can we call you and say this just happened? Will you participate? And most of them have been very good about it, and we've learned a lot from it. One thing that's critical is, to Nasser's earlier point, working with your vendors and doing your assessment before you sign on the dotted line as to what we're getting into, because some of them are not prepared to the level of security that you might expect, even very large providers. And knowing that up front and partnering with them on remediation is critical. And some of that does come through, as you said, during your incident testing scenarios.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing. So I think, absolutely our nature of our tabletops have changed over the years slowly. And we have engaged some of our vendors, some of our key vendors. And going forward, I think that will continue to become more and more critical. There are, I think, a range of scenarios when I think about tabletop that we are considering and we have done, all the way from what if it's a completely contained assets are managed by Jefferson, to infrastructure service and software as a service. So where I think the scenarios have, in our case, at least one scenario was, what if it's a multi-organizational incident where it's not just us, there are 30, 40 other organizations that are in the same thing. And it's interesting to watch, because I think more and more the nature of incidents is going to be like that, meaning if a host provider, if a cloud-based provider gets compromised, chances are that you're not the only one, right? And one of the questions that became evident for us, for instance, was that, hey, every single provider have resources where they have some assumptions on how many providers there are going to be, or customers they're going to be supporting at the same time. But when they are hit with an incident, they simply don't have enough resources to take phone calls and respond to every single customer or multiple customers at the same time. And that's something that we learned. That was a lesson learned for us. I don't know of a good solution there, but going back to how do we address our contracts and how do we build our relationship? How do we have empathy when someone is going through that? And those are the things that, I guess, again, lessons learned for us. But to your question directly, absolutely. From a tabletop perspective, we are engaging our partners, and that, I think, the tabletops with partners are just going to increase in the future, because just the nature of our assets and relationship is such that we cannot do much without engaging our partners anymore.
Awesome. Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that this is something really near and dear to me. And one, as a recovering CIO, I still feel like I'm sometimes in that seat, and I have a little bit of separation anxiety, but even more so, it's now being part of Sirius and working with professionals like yourself and others across the country. It's an affirmation, or I should say revalidation, of many of the things I'm seeing. And quite frankly, I've learned an enormous amount from the two of you today. Again, thank you for your time today.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.